The air is heavy with incense. The sound of priests chanting echoes through temple walls. And somewhere in the distance, a jackal's cry pierces the silence. You are not in the land of the living anymore. You are about to step into the Egyptian underworld, a realm where shadows stretch endlessly, where gods watch with unblinking eyes, and where every soul must prove its worth. The Egyptians believed death was not an end but a passage, a journey through the mysterious duat. This underworld was no simple resting place. It was a labyrinth of rivers, caverns, and gates, each guarded by beings who demanded truth and courage. To enter was to begin the most important voyage of existence, one that determined whether you would vanish into silence or walk forever in the paradise of the field of reeds. It was here that the Book of the Dead became the traveler's guide. Imagine a scroll unrolled beside you, its papyrus fibers whispering spells, its hieroglyphs glowing faintly in the torchlight. Each line is a map, each word a weapon, each spell a promise that you will not falter. The underworld is vast, but you are not alone. Anubis, the jackal-headed guardian, waits to guide you. Thoth, the divine scribe, stands ready to record your fate. Osiris, Lord of Eternity, watches from his throne. Every soul must face trials, every heart must be weighed, every truth must be spoken. The Egyptian underworld is not chaos but order, not terror but ritual. It is a place where mythology and history intertwine, where the living prepared for death with the same seriousness they gave to life. And now, you are stepping into that story, carried by the rhythm of ancient words, lulled by the cadence of ritual, drifting into the timeless dream of Egypt. If you love mythology and history from all cultures and forbidden ancient stories, subscribe, because this channel reveals the secrets behind every myth. And let me know from where you're watching. Hopefully not from inside a sarcophagus, because that would be awkwardly committed bedtime viewing. The Book of the Dead is not a single book in the way we think of novels or histories today. Instead, it is a collection of spells, hymns, and instructions written on papyrus scrolls, designed to guide the soul through the Egyptian afterlife. To the Egyptians, death was not an end, but a journey. And this text was the ultimate travel manual, a map through shadowed corridors, a set of passwords for guarded gates, and a series of protective charms against dangers lurking in the duat. The name Book of the Dead is a modern invention. The Egyptians themselves called it the Book of Coming Forth by Day, a title that reflects their belief that the soul, properly prepared, could rise again into the light after passing through the darkness of the underworld. It was not meant to be read in one sitting, nor to entertain, but to serve as a practical tool. Each spell had a purpose. One might help the soul avoid being devoured by serpents. Another might allow it to transform into a bird to escape danger, while yet another ensured the deceased could speak clearly before the gods. What makes the text fascinating is its blend of ritual seriousness and almost bureaucratic thoroughness. The deceased had to declare innocence in dozens of ways. I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not slain unjustly, covering every possible sin, as if the gods were meticulous auditors checking every detail. The scrolls also included hymns to praise the gods, invocations to summon protection, and instructions for navigating rivers of fire or caverns of silence. The Book of the Dead was not standardized. Each copy was unique, tailored to the individual buried with it. Wealthy nobles might commission long scrolls filled with elaborate illustrations, while commoners might have only a few spells written on pottery or linen. Yet the purpose was always the same: to ensure safe passage into eternity. In essence, the Book of the Dead was the Egyptians' way of preparing for the unknown. It was a manual for survival in the afterlife, a ritual text that combined faith, magic, and cosmic order. To read it today is to glimpse the ancient Egyptian obsession with balance, truth, and preparation, and to feel the rhythm of a culture that believed eternity was not chaos but harmony. The story of the Book of the Dead is inseparable from the story of papyrus itself. Papyrus was the lifeblood of Egyptian writing, a plant that grew abundantly along the Nile and was transformed into sheets that carried the words of eternity. Imagine stalks of green reeds cut, soaked, pressed, and dried beneath the Egyptian sun, then stitched together into scrolls that could stretch for dozens of feet. These scrolls became the canvas upon which the secrets of the afterlife were inscribed. The earliest funerary texts were not written on papyrus at all, but carved into the walls of pyramids. These were the pyramid texts, dating back to the Old Kingdom, reserved for kings and queens. Later, during the Middle Kingdom, they evolved into the coffin texts, painted inside wooden coffins for nobles and officials. By the New Kingdom, the tradition shifted again. Papyrus scrolls became the preferred medium, portable guides that could be buried with the deceased. This evolution reflected both practicality and accessibility. Papyrus was easier to produce, easier to personalize, and could be tailored to the individual's needs. Each scroll was unique. Wealthy Egyptians commissioned long, elaborate versions, filled with dozens of spells and vivid illustrations. These scrolls could stretch over 20 meters, unrolling like rivers of ink and color. Commoners, however, might afford only a few spells written on scraps of papyrus or even painted on linen wrappings. Yet, whether grand or humble, the purpose was the same: to guide the soul safely through the duat. The scribes who created these scrolls were meticulous. They copied spells from older traditions, rearranged them, and sometimes added new ones. The handwriting varied, sometimes elegant, sometimes hurried, depending on the skill of the scribe and the wealth of the patron. Illustrations showed the deceased standing before Osiris, sailing boats, plowing fields, or passing through gates. These images were not decorative but functional, visual aids to remind the soul of its journey. Over centuries, the scrolls became more standardized, though never entirely uniform. Some versions contained over 200 spells, others only a handful. The most famous copies, like the Papyrus of Ani, are masterpieces of art and ritual, filled with vibrant colors and detailed scenes. Others are plain, their hieroglyphs faded, their fibers fragile. Yet all carried the same promise: that the soul would not be lost, that the journey would be guided, that eternity would be reached. The history of these papyrus scrolls is a history of adaptation. From walls to coffins to scrolls, the Egyptians refined their guides to the afterlife, making them more personal, more portable, and more practical. The papyrus itself, delicate yet enduring, became the bridge between life and death, carrying words that echoed across millennia. In the quiet of tombs, these scrolls waited, their fibers whispering spells, their hieroglyphs glowing faintly in the torchlight. They were not books in the modern sense, but manuals of eternity, histories of belief, and testaments to a culture obsessed with balance, truth, and preparation. In the hush of the Egyptian underworld, one figure stands as the silent guardian of souls, Anubis, the jackal-headed god. His presence is unmistakable, his authority calm yet absolute. To the Egyptians, Anubis was not a god of terror, but of protection, the one who ensured that the journey through death was orderly, fair, and secure. Anubis was imagined as the overseer of embalming, the protector of tombs, and the guide of souls. When a body was prepared for burial, priests often wore masks shaped like his jackal head, invoking his presence during the sacred rituals. He was believed to watch over the mummification process, ensuring that the body was preserved. Without Anubis, the delicate balance between life and death could falter. But his role extended far beyond the tomb. In the Duat, Anubis guided the soul through shadowed corridors, past serpents and guardians, toward the Hall of Mat. There he stood beside the scales, carefully placing the heart of the deceased on one side and the feather of truth on the other. His calm authority ensured that the weighing was fair, that no trickery could interfere, that truth alone determined destiny. The Egyptians trusted Anubis because he was impartial. He did not favor kings over peasants, nor priests over farmers. Every soul was equal before him. Every heart weighed with the same precision. His role was not to condemn or absolve, but to guard the integrity of judgment. In this way, Anubis embodied the principle of Mat, balance, justice, and truth. Anubis was also seen as a companion. He did not abandon the soul in its trials, but walked beside it, steady and silent. His presence was a shield against fear, a reminder that even in the deepest shadows, guidance was near. For the Egyptians, this was a comfort. Death was not chaos, but order, not loneliness, but guardianship. In art, Anubis is often shown standing over the deceased, adjusting the scales, or guiding the soul. His jackal form symbolized vigilance. 4 jackals were known to wander near cemeteries. Yet in divine form, the jackal was not a scavenger, but a protector, ensuring that the dead were not disturbed, that their journey remained sacred. The role of Anubis in the afterlife was thus both practical and spiritual. He preserved the body, guided the soul, guarded the tomb, and oversaw judgment. He was the bridge between mortal ritual and divine eternity, the silent companion who ensured that death was not an end, but a passage into balance and peace. In the solemn halls of the Egyptian afterlife, where every soul awaited its fate, one figure stood with pen and scroll in hand, Thoth, the divine scribe. He was the god of wisdom, writing, and cosmic order, and his role in the journey of the dead was as crucial as Anubis' guardianship. If Anubis ensured fairness in the weighing of the heart, Thoth ensured that fairness was recorded, preserved, and remembered for eternity. He was also sometimes depicted as a baboon, another symbol of intelligence and vigilance. In either form, he embodied clarity, calculation, and truth. His presence in the Hall of Mat was not loud or dramatic, but steady and precise. As the scales tipped, as the heart was weighed against the feather of truth, Thoth wrote down the outcome with unerring accuracy. This act of recording was more than clerical to the Egyptians. Writing was sacred, a way of binding reality. What Thoth inscribed became eternal. His scrolls were not mere notes, but cosmic records, ensuring that the soul's fate was aligned with truth and justice. Without Thoth, judgment would be fleeting. With him, it was preserved forever. Thoth's wisdom extended beyond the hall of judgment. He was believed to have measured the heavens, calculated the movements of the stars and aligned the rhythms of the moon. Priests who studied astronomy and mathematics saw themselves as reflections of his divine role, their calculations echoing his cosmic order. In this way, Thoth was not only the recorder of the dead, but the architect of balance in the universe. The Book of the Dead reflects his influence in countless spells. Many incantations invoke his name, asking for clarity of speech, precision of memory, and protection against error. The deceased relied on Thoth's wisdom to speak correctly before the gods, to remember the sacred words, and to align themselves with the cosmic laws. His presence was a safeguard against forgetfulness, a reminder that knowledge was the greatest weapon in the afterlife. In art, Thoth is often shown standing beside Anubis, pen poised, scroll unfurled, eyes fixed on the scales. His calm authority balances the drama of judgment, reminding mortals that truth is not only weighed but written, not only spoken but preserved. He is the eternal scribe, the guardian of memory, the keeper of cosmic order. For the Egyptians, Thoth was more than a god. He was the embodiment of wisdom itself. His role in the afterlife was a reflection of his role in the cosmos, to ensure that balance endured, that truth prevailed, that eternity was aligned with justice. In the hush of the Duat, his pen moves steadily, his scroll gleams softly, his wisdom flows endlessly. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not a sudden end, but a carefully orchestrated passage. Preparing the soul for eternity was as important as living a righteous life, and funerary rituals were the bridge between the two. These rituals were both practical and spiritual, designed to preserve the body and empower the spirit for its journey through the Duat. The most iconic ritual was mummification. Priests, often wearing masks shaped like the jackal head of Anubis, oversaw the process with reverence. Organs were removed, the body dried with natron salts, and then wrapped in countless layers of linen. Each layer was accompanied by prayers, each knot tied with intention. Amulets were placed between the wrappings, scarabs to guard the heart, ankhs to promise eternal life, and eyes of Horus to ward off evil. The body became not just preserved, but transformed into a sacred vessel, infused with magic and protection. The tomb itself was prepared as a miniature universe. Walls were painted with scenes of farming, feasting, and sailing the Nile, not mere decoration, but spells in visual form. Food, drink, clothing, and tools were placed inside, ensuring the deceased would never hunger or thirst. Figurines called shabdi stood ready to serve miniature workers or carry burdens in the field of reeds. One of the most vital ceremonies was the opening of the mouth, performed at the tomb. This ritual symbolically restored the senses of the deceased. Priests touched the mouth of the mummy or statue with sacred tools, invoking the gods to grant speech, breath, and vitality. Without it, the soul might be mute in the afterlife. With it, the deceased could recite spells and defend themselves before the gods. Every ritual carried layers of meaning. The wrappings mirrored divine protection. The tombs, paintings, reflected eternal abundance. And the offerings symbolized harmony between the living and the dead. Together, they ensured the soul stepped into the underworld, not as a wanderer, but as a traveler prepared, empowered, and ready for eternity. The Egyptian Book of the Dead was more than a scroll of prayers. It was a toolkit of spells, each crafted to protect and empower the soul on its journey through the Duat. These spells were not random incantations, but carefully chosen words of power, designed to address every possible danger the deceased might encounter. To the Egyptians, language itself was magic, and the right words spoken at the right time could open gates, silence demons, and transform weakness into strength. Some spells acted as passports, granting the soul permission to pass through guarded thresholds. Each gate in the underworld had its own guardian, often a serpent or hybrid creature, demanding a password. The scrolls provided these words, ensuring the traveler would not be trapped. Other spells were transformative, allowing the soul to take the shape of a bird, a lotus, or even a crocodile. These transformations were not fanciful but practical. A bird could fly over obstacles. A lotus symbolized rebirth, and a crocodile carried the strength to face hostile forces. There were also protective spells, shields against dangers lurking in the shadows. Some guarded against venom, others against fire, others against the loss of memory or speech. The Egyptians feared that without these protections, the soul might falter, unable to defend itself before the gods. By reciting the spells, the deceased carried a kind of divine armor woven from words. Perhaps the most famous were the negative confessions, a litany of innocence spoken before the gods. I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not slain unjustly. These declarations were themselves spells, aligning the soul with Mat, the principle of truth and balance. To speak them was to prove purity, to show that the heart was light enough to pass the scales. Together, these spells formed a map of survival. They guided the soul through rivers of fire, past serpents, through gates, and into the presence of Osiris. They were practical, thorough, and endlessly reassuring. For the Egyptians, the afterlife was not chaos, but a ritualized journey, and the spells of the Book of the Dead were the steady rhythm that carried the soul safely toward eternal peace. The Duat, the Egyptian underworld, was imagined as a vast and mysterious landscape, part shadowed labyrinth, part cosmic river, part trial ground. To step into it was to leave behind the familiar Nile and enter a realm where every turn carried danger. Every gate demanded courage, and every moment tested the soul's preparation. The journey began with silence. The soul drifted into caverns where the air was heavy and the walls glowed faintly with hieroglyphs. Rivers of fire flowed in the distance, serpents coiled in the shadows, and guardians stood watch at hidden thresholds. Without the words of the Book of the Dead, the traveler would falter. With them, the path unfolded like a map written in light. The Duat was not chaos, but order. Every trial had its purpose, every danger its lesson. The soul might face lakes of flame, but a spell could cool the waters. It might encounter demons with knives, but a declaration of innocence could silence them. It might be asked to transform into a falcon to soar above obstacles, into a lotus to symbolize rebirth, into a crocodile to embody strength. Each transformation was a reminder that the soul carried power, that it was not helpless, but adaptable. Osiris waited at the end, seated on his throne, ready to judge. The journey was long, but it was not aimless. It was a ritual path, a series of trials designed to prove truth, balance, and readiness for eternity. For the Egyptians, the Duat was not a nightmare, but a sacred passage. To walk through it was to demonstrate courage, to speak truth, to align with Mat. And as the soul moved deeper into its corridors, past serpents and gates, it carried the assurance that every danger had been accounted for, every spell prepared, every step leading closer to eternal peace. At the very center of the Egyptian vision of the afterlife lay the most delicate and decisive test, the trial of the heart. The Egyptians believed the heart was not only the seat of emotion, but the record of a person's deeds. Unlike the brain, which they thought of as less important, the heart carried memory, truth, and conscience. It was the ultimate witness, and in the afterlife, it could not be silenced. The trial took place in the Hall of Mat, a vast chamber presided over by Osiris, Lord of the Dead. Anubis guided the soul forward, steady and calm, while Thoth stood ready to record the outcome. At the center of the hall stood the great scales. On one side rested the heart of the deceased. On the other, the feather of Mat, the symbol of truth, balance, and cosmic order. The moment was tense, yet ritualized. The soul recited the negative confessions, declaring innocence. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not slain unjustly. Each statement was a spell, aligning the soul with truth. The gods listened, the scales trembled, and the heart revealed its weight. If the heart was light, balanced with the feather, the soul was declared righteous and allowed to pass into the field of reeds. But if the heart was heavy, burdened by lies or injustice, the consequences were dire. Waiting nearby was Ammit, the devourer, part lion, part crocodile, part hippopotamus. Should the scales tip against the soul, Ammit consumed the heart, and with it the person's existence. There was no eternal torment, no second chance, only oblivion. This trial reflected the Egyptians' deepest belief that truth was the foundation of eternity. Wealth, status, and power meant nothing in the Hall of Mat. Every soul was equal. Every heart weighed with the same feather. It was a moment of pure justice, where balance determined destiny. For the Egyptians, the trial of the heart was both terrifying and reassuring. Terrifying because nothing could be hidden, reassuring because truth alone decided fate. In the hush of the hall, the scales gleamed, the feather rested, and the heart spoke, revealing whether the soul would vanish into silence or step into eternal peace. At the heart of the Egyptian afterlife stood the great scales of Mat, the ultimate symbol of truth and balance. This was no ordinary weighing, but the most decisive moment in a soul's journey. The Egyptians believed that every deed, every word, every thought was carried within the heart, and when death came, that heart would be measured against the feather of Mat, the embodiment of cosmic order, justice, and harmony. The scene unfolded in the Hall of Two Truths, a vast chamber filled with gods and divine witnesses. Anubis.com and Impartial placed the heart of the deceased on one side of the scales. On the other side rested the feather, light and pure. Thoth, the divine scribe, stood ready to record the outcome, his pen poised, his scroll unfurled. Osiris presided over the hall, seated on his throne, watching with solemn authority. The soul, trembling yet hopeful, recited the negative confessions, declaring innocence. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not slain unjustly. Each statement was a spell, aligning the heart with truth. The gods listened, the scales trembled, and the balance revealed the soul's fate. If the heart was light, equal to the feather, the soul was declared righteous. It was allowed to pass into the field of reeds, a paradise of abundance and peace. But if the heart was heavy, burdened by lies or injustice, the consequences were final. There was no eternal torment, only oblivion, a fate the Egyptians feared above all. The scales of Mat reflected the Egyptians' deepest belief that truth was the foundation of eternity. Wealth, power, and status meant nothing in this hall. Every soul was equal. every heart weighed with the same feather. It was a moment of pure justice, where balance alone determined destiny. In the hush of the hall, the scales gleamed, the feather rested, and the heart spoke. The trial was complete, the judgment sealed, and the soul's path revealed, either into eternal peace or into silence. As the soul journeys deeper into the duat, the path narrows and the air grows heavy. Ahead lie the guardians of the threshold, beings of immense power who stand watch at gates and passages. They are not enemies in the traditional sense, but challenges, tests of memory, courage, and truth. To pass them is to prove readiness. To falter is to remain trapped in shadow. The Egyptians imagined these guardians in many forms. Some were towering figures with blazing eyes, part human and part beast. Others were serpents coiled in silence, their scales shimmering like fire. Still others were hybrid creatures with names that sounded both terrifying and oddly bureaucratic, each demanding the correct words before allowing passage. The Book of the Dead provided these words, passwords, and spells carefully inscribed to ensure the traveler could move forward. Each threshold was a lesson. One guardian might demand the soul to speak its innocence, another to recall the names of gods, another to recite a spell of transformation. The gates were not barriers of brute force, but of wisdom. Knowledge was the key, and preparation was the weapon. The Egyptians believed that without these spells, the soul would falter, unable to answer, unable to pass. The guardians were formidable, but they were not unjust. They opened their gates only for those who carried truth, balance, and preparation. For the Egyptians, these guardians symbolized the seriousness of eternity. The afterlife was not given freely, but earned through reverence, wisdom, and ritual. To pass the thresholds was to prove that the soul had lived in harmony with Mat, that it carried integrity into eternity. In the hush of the duat, the gates shimmer, the guardians watch. Each threshold passed brings the traveler closer to eternal peace. The Book of the Dead was not simply a manual of spells. It was a mirror of the universe itself. Every line, every symbol, every ritual reflected the Egyptians' belief in Mat, the cosmic principle of truth, balance, and order. To them, the afterlife was not chaos, but a continuation of the same laws that governed the stars, the Nile, and the daily rhythm of life. The scrolls reveal this harmony in countless ways. The weighing of the heart against the feather of Mat was more than judgment. It was the embodiment of balance, the same balance that kept the sun rising each morning and the river flowing each season. Just as the cosmos depended on equilibrium, so too did the soul. A heavy heart disrupted that order, while a light heart aligned with it, allowing the deceased to pass into eternity. Spells themselves were echoes of cosmic law. Words carried power because they were believed to be fragments of creation. The same forces spoken by the gods when the world began. To recite a spell was to participate in that divine order, to align oneself with the rhythm of the universe. Transformation spells, becoming a bird, a lotus, or a crocodile, were not random, but symbolic of cosmic cycles, rebirth, resilience, and strength. Even the illustrations on papyrus scrolls reflected this worldview. Gods were shown in precise forms, colors chosen with intention, gestures repeated with ritual accuracy. These were not artistic flourishes, but visual affirmations of cosmic truth. The scrolls became miniature universes, each one a carefully balanced system, where every detail reinforced the laws of Mat. For the Egyptians, The afterlife was not separate from the cosmos, but woven into it. The journey through the duat mirrored the journey of the sun through the night sky. Trials reflected the struggles of daily life, and judgment echoed the eternal balance of truth. The scrolls were guides, yes, but they were also reminders. To live in harmony with Maat was to prepare for eternity. In their endless lines of spells and hymns, the Book of the Dead whispered the same message, that the universe was order, that truth was eternal, and that the soul, if aligned with cosmic law, would find peace beyond the shadowed gates. The Egyptian underworld was imagined not as a straight road, but as a labyrinth filled with hidden chambers and secret paths that tested the soul's endurance and memory. These were places of silence and shadow, where the walls seemed to close in and the air grew heavy with mystery. To the Egyptians, these chambers symbolized the unknown, the parts of existence that could not be seen in life but had to be faced in death. The Book of the Dead offered guidance for these passages. Spells described how to recognize hidden doors, how to speak the names of guardians, and how to avoid traps that might ensnare the unwary. Some chambers were said to contain rivers of fire, others caverns filled with serpents, and still others paths that twisted endlessly unless the soul remembered the right words. The scrolls acted like a map, though written in ritual language rather than diagrams, ensuring the traveler could find the way forward. These secret paths were not meant to terrify, but to teach. Each chamber represented a trial of wisdom, a reminder that eternity was not given freely, but earned through preparation. The soul had to prove it carried knowledge, courage, and truth. A forgotten spell could mean being trapped in darkness. A remembered word could open the way to light. The Egyptians believed that even in these hidden places, divine companions were near. Anubis guided silently, Thoth's wisdom lingered in every inscription, and protective spirits of ancestors walked unseen beside the traveler. The chambers were dangerous, yes, but they were also opportunities, moments where the soul demonstrated its readiness for eternal peace. In the imagination of Egypt, the duat was vast, layered, and filled with mysteries. The hidden chambers and secret paths were part of that vision, reminding mortals that the afterlife was not simple but profound, not chaos but ritual order. To pass through them was to step deeper into the rhythm of eternity, closer to the shimmering fields of paradise. For the Egyptians, the afterlife was not simply a place of judgment and reward. It was a realm where magic was as essential as food or water. Magic, or Heka, was considered a divine force woven into the fabric of the universe. It was not superstition, but a sacred energy, a gift from the gods that allowed mortals to interact with the unseen world. In the journey through the duat, magic was the soul's greatest defense and most trusted companion. The Book of the Dead is filled with spells that embody this belief. Each incantation was a piece of magic, carefully crafted to protect the traveler. Some spells silenced serpents, others cooled rivers of fire, and still others transformed the soul into powerful forms. To the Egyptians, these transformations were not fanciful tricks, but practical strategies. A falcon could soar above obstacles, a lotus symbolized rebirth, and a crocodile carried strength to face hostile forces. Magic was adaptability, the ability to meet danger with divine power. Amulets placed within the wrappings of the mummy were also infused with magic. The scarab protected the heart, the eye of Horus guarded health, and the ankh promised eternal life. These objects were not mere symbols, but vessels of Heka, radiating protective energy into the soul's journey. Even the colors used in tomb paintings carried magical meaning: green for rebirth, gold for divinity, black for fertility and renewal. Magic was also tied to speech. Words themselves were believed to hold power, echoes of creation spoken by the gods. To recite a spell was to participate in that divine act, to align oneself with the forces that shaped the cosmos. Forgetting a spell could mean disaster. Remembering it meant survival. In the Egyptian vision, magic was not separate from religion, but its heartbeat. It was the invisible thread connecting mortals to gods, the force that turned ritual into reality, and the shield that carried the soul safely through the duat. Without magic, the afterlife was perilous. With it, the journey became possible. The gates opened, and eternity unfolded in balance and peace. In the Egyptian vision of the afterlife, the soul did not walk alone. Alongside the gods and guardians were the spirits of ancestors, protective guides, who offered comfort and strength. These ancestral spirits were believed to linger in the duat, watching over their descendants, ensuring that the journey through shadowed corridors was not faced in isolation. Family ties were sacred in Egypt, and death did not sever them. The living honored the dead with offerings of food, drink, and prayers, believing that these gifts nourished the spirits. In return, ancestors acted as protectors, whispering guidance to the soul, shielding it from dangers and reminding it of the spells needed to pass through gates. The relationship was reciprocal. The living sustained the dead, and the dead blessed the living. Protective guides were not only ancestors, but also divine beings. Some were minor gods, others benevolent spirits, each assigned to guard the traveler. They appeared in many forms: falcons soaring above obstacles, jackals prowling beside tombs, or unseen presences walking silently at the soul's side. Their role was to ensure that the deceased did not falter, that serpents did not strike, that rivers of fire did not consume. The Book of the Dead often invoked these guides directly. Spells called upon ancestors to stand beside the soul, to lend their wisdom, to remind the traveler of family bonds that stretched beyond death. In tomb paintings, the deceased was sometimes shown surrounded by relatives, a visual reminder that eternity was not solitary but communal. For the Egyptians, this belief was deeply comforting. Death was not a lonely passage, but a continuation of family and community. The soul carried with it the strength of generations, the protection of ancestors, and the guidance of spirits who had walked the path before. In the hush of the duat, these protective guides lingered. Their presence was unseen but felt, their wisdom carried in whispers, their strength woven into the journey. With ancestors and spirits at its side, the soul stepped forward, not alone, but supported by the eternal bond of family and faith. After trials, gates, and the weighing of the heart, the soul's journey reached its most beautiful destination, the field of reeds. This was the Egyptian vision of paradise, a perfected reflection of the Nile Valley, where abundance flowed endlessly and peace stretched without end. To arrive here was to be declared righteous, to have passed every test, and to step into eternity with joy. The field of reeds was imagined as a landscape of shimmering waters, fertile fields, and gentle breezes. Crops grew tall without toil, rivers never dried, and the sun shone with eternal warmth. The soul could plow and harvest, sail boats, feast with family, and walk among ancestors, but all without exhaustion or hunger. It was Egypt perfected, a dream of balance and harmony carried into the afterlife. Here, the gods were present, but not as judges. Osiris welcomed the righteous, Anubis no longer weighed hearts, and Thoth's scrolls were complete. The soul was free, no longer burdened by trials or fear. The field of reeds was not a place of idleness, but of eternal fulfillment, where every joy of life continued in perfection. The Egyptians believed that paradise was not distant or abstract, but familiar. It was the Nile Valley without drought, without famine, without injustice. To them, eternity was not escape, but continuity. The same rhythms of farming, feasting, and family carried into a realm where balance never faltered. The Book of the Dead described this destination with care, reminding the soul of what awaited if truth prevailed. The scrolls spoke of endless harvests, of reunions with loved ones, of peace that never ended. For the Egyptians, this vision was both comforting and motivating. To live in harmony with Maat was to earn a place in the field of reeds. And so, after shadowed corridors and fearful trials, the soul stepped into light. The fields shimmered, the rivers flowed, the ancestors gathered. Eternity was not silence but abundance, not chaos but harmony, not fear but peace. The journey was complete, and the soul rested in the eternal embrace of the field of reeds. The Book of the Dead was not only a guide for the soul's journey through the Duat, it was also a mirror held up to the living. Every spell, every ritual, every vision of judgment carried lessons meant to shape how people lived their daily lives. In this way, the wisdom of the dead became a teacher for the living, reminding them that eternity was built upon choices made in the present. The most powerful lesson was the importance of Maat, the principle of truth, balance, and justice. The weighing of the heart against the feather was not just an afterlife trial, but a reminder that every action mattered. To live dishonestly was to burden the heart. To live in harmony was to keep it light. Egyptians understood that their deeds would echo beyond death, and so they strove to live with fairness, kindness, and respect for order. Another lesson was the value of preparation. Funerary rituals, amulets, and spells were not only for the dead, but reminders to the living that life itself required readiness. Just as the soul needed words of power to pass through gates, the living needed wisdom, discipline, and devotion to navigate the challenges of the mortal world. Preparation was both spiritual and practical, ensuring that one's legacy endured. The scrolls also taught the importance of community and remembrance. Families sustained the dead with offerings, and in return, ancestors blessed the living. This cycle of care reflected the Egyptian belief that life and death were intertwined, that memory was a form of immortality. To honor the dead was to strengthen the living, and to live well was to inspire future generations. Ultimately, the lessons of the dead urged the living to see life as sacred. Every word spoken, every act performed, every truth upheld was part of a larger cosmic balance. The Duat was not distant, but a reflection of earthly existence, and the choices made in life shaped the journey beyond. In this way, the Book of the Dead whispered across time: live with truth, prepare with wisdom, honor your ancestors, and eternity will open its gates. The Book of the Dead was not only a collection of words and spells, it was also a tapestry of illustrations rich with symbolism. These images were more than decoration. They were visual spells, carefully designed to guide the soul and reinforce the cosmic truths of the afterlife. Every color, Every gesture, every figure carried meaning, reminding the deceased of the forces at work in eternity. Colors themselves were powerful symbols. Gold represented divinity and the eternal brilliance of the sun. Green signified rebirth and renewal, echoing the fertile fields of the Nile. Black, far from being ominous, symbolized fertility and the promise of regeneration, drawn from the rich soil of the river valley. Each hue was chosen with intention, transforming the papyrus into a living map of cosmic order. Figures of gods were depicted with precise attributes. Anubis appeared as a jackal, guardian of tombs and protector of the dead. Osiris was shown in green skin, embodying resurrection. Thoth carried his ibis head, the scribe of divine truth, while Mat was crowned with her feather, the eternal measure of balance. These images reminded the soul of who to call upon, who to trust, and who would judge. Gestures and poses also carried meaning. Raised hands symbolized protection, seated figures conveyed authority, and the act of weighing the heart was drawn with solemn precision. Even the placement of figures mattered. Gods were often shown larger than mortals, emphasizing their power, while the deceased was depicted humbly, awaiting guidance. Scenes of daily life, farming, feasting, sailing, were not mere nostalgia, but promises. They symbolized the abundance awaiting in the field of reeds, assuring the soul that paradise mirrored the joys of earthly existence, perfected and eternal. Together, these illustrations formed a second language, one of images rather than words. They spoke directly to the soul, reinforcing the lessons of the scrolls, reminding the traveler of truth, balance, and divine protection. For the Egyptians, art was not passive, but active, a living spell, a visual prayer, and a sacred bridge between mortal life and eternal peace. The Book of the Dead was more than a funerary text. It was a cultural cornerstone that shaped how Egyptians understood life, death, and eternity. Its influence extended far beyond tombs and rituals, weaving itself into daily practices, art, and the collective imagination of an entire civilization. At its heart, the scrolls reinforced the principle of Mat, truth, balance, and justice. This idea was not confined to the afterlife, but guided the living. Farmers, artisans, and rulers alike were reminded that their actions carried eternal weight. The negative confessions recited in the Hall of Mat echoed into everyday life, encouraging honesty, fairness, and respect for order. In this way, the scrolls became a moral compass, shaping behavior across society. The scrolls also influenced art and architecture. Tomb paintings, temple carvings, and even household amulets drew upon imagery and spells from the Book of the Dead. Scenes of judgment, depictions of gods, and symbols of rebirth were repeated across Egypt, embedding the scrolls' teachings into the visual language of the culture. To see these images was to be reminded of the journey every soul would one day face. Education and literacy were touched by the scrolls as well. Scribes studied its passages, learning not only to copy the sacred words, but to understand their meaning. Knowledge of the spells was considered a form of power, and those who could read them held a special place in society. The scrolls thus elevated the role of writing, making literacy a bridge between mortal life and divine eternity. Perhaps most importantly, the scrolls shaped family and community traditions. Funerary rituals, offerings, and prayers were guided by its instructions, ensuring that the living remained connected to the dead. This bond reinforced the idea that death was not an end, but a continuation, and that families carried responsibility for one another across generations. In every field, from morality to art, from education to ritual, the Book of the Dead left its mark. It was not simply a guide for the soul, but a guide for the culture, reminding Egyptians that eternity was built upon truth, preparation, and harmony with the cosmos. The journey through the Book of the Dead reveals more than spells and rituals. It unveils the heart of Egyptian wisdom. To the ancients, death was not an end, but a continuation, a passage into eternity shaped by truth, preparation, and harmony with the cosmos. Every trial, every guardian, every spell reflected their belief that life and afterlife were bound together by the principle of balance, justice, and order. The Egyptians taught that the soul must be prepared, not only with amulets and scrolls, but with a life lived in honesty. The weighing of the heart against the feather was a reminder that deeds mattered, that eternity was earned through righteousness. Their rituals of mummification, offerings, and prayers were not only acts of devotion, but reflections of a deeper truth, that the living and the dead were forever connected, each sustaining the other. The wisdom of the Egyptian afterlife lies in its reassurance. Death was not chaos, nor was it feared as annihilation. Instead, it was a journey guided by God's ancestors and spells, a path that led to the field of reeds, where abundance and peace awaited. The scrolls whispered that eternity was not distant or abstract, but familiar and comforting, a perfected continuation of the joys of life. For us, these teachings still carry meaning. They remind us that truth and balance are timeless, that preparation and remembrance matter, and that the bonds of family and community endure beyond death. The Egyptians saw eternity not as silence, but as harmony, not as fear, but as peace. And so, as the soul completes its journey, the story closes gently. The gates of the Duat fade into light, the scales rest in balance, and the fields shimmer with eternal abundance. The wisdom of the ancients lingers, a quiet reminder that truth guides all paths and peace awaits all who walk with harmony. Now let the scrolls rest, the journey complete. May the soul find its eternal home, and may you drift into your own gentle dreams. Good night.